Live from Swansea, this is the Twilight Show with Nathan Gynn on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
And Croeso e Abertawe, welcome to Swansea. And we should be back there. Just checking in. If you're live in the studio, if you can hear me, just give me a little tap there just to let me know that you are here. I think we had a little technical issue. Hi, Gemma. Not sure what happened there. I think it just popped me out for a second. We are back and we are live. As I say, Croeso e Abertawe, welcome to Swansea. Gemma is with us in the studio and we're going to be talking about teacher bashing first of all. So Gemma, if you want to hit that call in button again, we'll be able to put you on the line and get you to join our show. So we are also talking a little bit later on with Amy Loxley from ICANN, the communication charity, and she's going to be talking to us about speech and language needs. So as I say there, I think Gemma, I do see her saying hi in the studio. If you're also in the studio, you can text us a message, let us know where you're listening from, and let us know what you're up to. As I say, I'm in Swansea now. My jingle now correctly stating, for me, very glad to have it, that I am in Wales. It is not sunny today. Ever since I've arrived, it has been a bit rainy. It has been a bit windy, certainly blustery today. So I've not yet had that beach experience. Welcome, Gemma. I've just connected you again. I'm not sure what happened there. I think we just glitched out for a second. So you should be able to start talking, Gemma.
Hi there.
Hi, how's it going? You're coming through loud and clear.
Oh, good. I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah. As I was saying, I'm just talking about my recent move. I've just moved to South Wales, across the border from England, back to South Wales. Always dropping in my incidental Welsh as I do so. Bore da, croeso, welcome. So we were just talking about that. Where are you calling us from today, Gemma?
I'm in Tinnabrooch in Scotland, not Tinnabrooch, sorry, Portavadie, which is near Tinnabrooch, a wee remote place, having a staycation.
Oh, well, fab. Well, your connection is wonderful. You're coming through loud and clear. Where is it that you're normally based then, Gemma?
I'm usually in Renfrewshire, a village in Renfrewshire, not far from Glasgow.
Okay, just because I like, ticking it off my my list of people, listeners and callers that I've got. We had last week, we had some people from Oman in the Middle East, and we've had kind of from all over because we are international. So yeah, I'll tick off Scotland, tick. I should get myself a little map and I can kind of play through how it goes. So Gemma.
Pins on it.
Yeah, I should do, or one of those scratch off ones that you can get. So Gemma, what we were going to talk a bit about with you first is you did an article in the TES talking about some ways of dealing with teacher bashing, and so it was lovely for you to accept to come on and maybe have a chat about the kind of things that go on, I guess, that we've all heard, and some of the positive ways I guess we can deal with that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's start off. And obviously, if you are listening in the studio, feel free to message in, either text in or you can call in and let us know some of the things you've heard. But certainly, I think, and the ones that were mentioned in your article as well, I've heard lazy teachers. I have heard that. I do hear that, and too many holidays. Those are two certainly that I've heard a lot of. Are there any other common ones that you sort of think you come across?
Yeah, I mean, I think we get that all the time anyway, don't we, in a normal year? But I think it's really ramped up with the pandemic because lots of other things have been added to the repertoire this year about how we were sitting doing nothing during lockdown. There was that comment that went viral that we spent all our time drinking wine, spreading rumours, having affairs. I feel like it's really ramped up this year. It's like teacher bashing on steroids.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there have been points where it's kind of gone up and down and up and down. And there's been points where it's kind of like, oh, we're going to clap everyone. Yeah, but not you. And the schools have been amazing in this. And then it dropped down again. And it seems to be coming in waves. I never really know where where I'm coming from. But I think definitely you're right. This year, it has been worse. And I think one of the sad things for me on that is I remember talking to some of my younger colleagues, not new teachers, but, maybe not been in the game a long time. And I sort of remember as the year was going on, and I said, listen, it is coming. I can feel it, that we will at some point be the bad guy. And I just kind of had that knowing. And that's really sad to think about, that you kind of just know that at some point this is going to happen.
Yeah, it's sad, and it comes in waves, and we know sometimes when things are going on, like a pandemic or things are hitting a dip and people are down, we know that we're going to be the scapegoats for that in some way, or that the tabloids are going to start stirring things up. We just know when it's coming, don't we?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's it. It's kind of almost, we get it at the start of the summer holidays. We know it's going to come. So certainly, I'm trying to think. I am in a kind of unique situation, maybe not that unique, actually, hearing some of our other listeners. But my sister is also a teacher, and both my parents were teachers. So I don't get it so much in my family, if that makes sense. I don't get so much of it, but I do certainly get it from friends who sort of assume that, it comes to any of the holidays and we are feet up again, holiday again. So certainly I get that one. From friends. And also, I think, as you say, with the stability of the job and as other people have struggled through this period of COVID or maybe been on furlough, there's also that element that people sometimes take a slight dig at, where they'll sort of talk about our pay, or they'll talk about that it's a really safe job. So I've heard that as well. Is that something you've come across?
Yeah, we have that quite a lot in Scotland, and ironically in Scotland, I think I've been teaching for about 6 years, and I think my cohort were one of the last groups to come out, and most people got permanent jobs, but it's not been good since then. A lot of teachers can't get work, or they're on 0 hours contracts. So yeah, I mean, it's a dig that doesn't make a lot of sense, because it's not the reality. I know so many teachers who are struggling to get work.
Yeah, I can certainly relate that. That's why I left South Wales in the first place. I trained in South Wales, and there's a lot of training colleges in South Wales. At least there was 10 years ago when I was training. We always made a joke that Wales now exports more PE teachers to London than it does coal. And that's kind of your stereotypical image of a Welsh PE teacher in an inner city London school teaching rugby. But yeah, so I moved away and I have come back. All right, so we've got this kind of low-level niggling that's always been going on. What sort of things do you think we should be doing maybe to combat that, of the kind of low-level stuff, that kind of low digs that we talk about getting every year?
Well, I was watching the comments online, so I think a lot of people do say, well, come and join us and be a teacher, and not many people are going to take us up on that offer. But I think if it's someone who is a genuine friend, who actually cares about you as a person, they will listen to the amount of work that you've got to do. I mean, my close friends understand that I don't really see them during term time because I don't have the time, so they understand the reality. But I think you've got to be close to a teacher to see just how intense it is during term time. I mean, I'd welcome anybody to shadow us and join us at work at 7 or 7:30 in the morning and still be there at 5, and not really taking a lunch break because you've not got time. I would challenge anybody to see the reality of the job. People just see the 9 to 3 part. They don't see, and that's the easy part, isn't it? It's everything around the 9 to 3 period that's the hard bit.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I've just left being a deputy head at a primary school, and I try and explain to my friends that I maybe in the run up, when I joined the school, it was a school that required improvement, and I think that does affect kind of workload somewhat. But I'd be working 6 till 6:30 without a break, and I would be working through easily 12-hour shifts, maybe governors after that as well. And it, there wasn't a coffee break, there wasn't necessarily a lunch break, and trying to explain that to people, and the tiredness as well, to my friends who were sort of midweek sort of saying, oh, why don't you meet us up for I'd be like, no, I honestly can't. Weekend at best. And yeah, I think you're right, there is something around that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes actually children see it better, because when I was doing my probation year, there was a little boy in my class, his mum would clean the school at night, and he'd say, oh, miss, my mum said you were still here after 6 last night. And some kids were like, oh, I wouldn't want to be a teacher. I've heard how hard you need to work. But there just seems to be this perception among the public that we just come in at 5 to 9 and we leave at 3 or 3:30. And it's just all so easy, and then they don't understand just how intense the job is and how tiring it is, and the mental load and the things that you never really switch off, I don't think, unless you're actually on holiday.
Yeah, I think you're right about that as well. I remember reading somewhere, and I'm not sure where, and but something was said about the number of decisions that a teacher makes within a day, and this kind of the fact that you're constantly mentally juggling things and constantly reassessing, and there was something about that was made it particularly challenging that you wouldn't necessarily see in other jobs. That you
Yeah, I
were
read that.
constant.
Yeah, I think they said it's similar to being a surgeon, isn't it? Compare, the amount of decisions that we need to make in a day.
Yeah, definitely. Now I can't. Maybe if you're listening and you remember reading that as well, we've both read it. Can't put our finger on where, but there
Yeah.
was certainly something around the decision making. Obviously, if you've just joined us in the studio, we are talking with Gemma Clark, and we're talking about teacher bashing and some of the positive ways we can deal with it. Now, Gemma, one of the things you talked about there was, in some of the tweets and online, we've seen some comments from some people sort of saying that, well, come and join us then. Now, for me, I'm not sure I like that as an approach. I find it, I don't know, a bit confrontational. I think you're definitely more along my wave of thinking, and there's certainly a different ways that people will challenge this, but where you're trying to bring people on board and get them to understand it. And I think you're right about people being closer. Certainly helps. But I guess it's how we do that with a nation as well.
Yeah, and I think the tabloids have a lot to answer for, and I think whether we like it or not, education is very politicised. So we're quite often a political football as well, which doesn't help. I think we make for quite good clickbait, which I think we need to counteract. We try and do things. We speak on the radio, and we'll write test articles, and we'll tweet things. But I think the mainstream tabloids, they're not very supportive of us. If anything, they make mischief and they exaggerate things, don't they?
Yeah, certainly. And, this is where obviously we are a broad church here at Teacher Talk Radio. But I myself started off earlier in my career as a trade union representative, school representative for my school. And I'd often march at the Tolpuddle Martyrs Festival, down on the south coast, and I was really heavily involved in that. And I left it behind when I moved into leadership because I didn't think it was right for a leadership person to be actively pursuing that in the same way. But I always remember seeing this kind of, I think Michael Gove called it the blob. And we're often seen, you're right, as, they're blocking things, certainly through this COVID period. There's been a lot of press against the National Education Union, certainly, who are my union, and there are other unions or even non-union unions available, I should say. But yeah, certainly kind of a pushback against they're trying to block it, or they're trying to make things easy for themselves. Is that something you've noticed?
Yeah, I have. And with the pandemic this year, what I have noticed is that there's been a lot of trolls, particularly people who are anti-lockdown, anti-mask or anti-vaccine have been heading to the trade unions. Because I remember there were a lot of teachers on the EIS page, which most teachers in Scotland are in, were asking, can we have a private place where we can talk, because we're just getting inundated. So what I've been trying to encourage everybody to do is every time you see a troll on your trade union page and they're not a teacher and they're just there to be confrontational and to wind people up, just block them. And if everybody did this, if everyone who, blatantly not a teacher and just they're looking for confrontation and trouble, if we all just block them, they'd just be kind of screaming into a void, and then you've got your online space back, like we should have. Because there's legitimate things that teachers want to talk about during a pandemic. We might have concerns about ventilation, about all kinds of things, and we should be able to talk about that without it turning into like a tabloid comment section. That's never how it was meant to be.
Yeah, I guess, one of those things, I guess, is hard, though. And I don't know if you followed this. There was a period during, and it was a little while ago now, maybe a couple of months ago. And I think it was about a tattooed teacher, the tattooed head.
Yes.
I won't go into details about it, but I remember there was these comments about, overly woke head teachers, but they came from, people high up in media kind of taking this kind of active approach at taking digs at education and digs at people in education because of their beliefs. And so, the tabloid media, but I think you're right. There are individual trolls, but then there's that organised I wonder if maybe it's not organised, but more collective action above that, at a bigger scale as well, isn't there?
Yeah, I think the anti-vax movement is quite a big problem just now. And when you look into it, people have seen the documentaries and people are understandably a bit suspicious of big pharma. AstraZeneca are a big pharmaceutical company. But also, people need to realise that the wellness industry is also a big industry, capital letters. There's a lot of money actually to be made from vaccine hesitancy and misinformation and propaganda. And because schools have been closed or there's been safety measures in schools that people don't like, we've kind of become targeted by these people, sometimes in quite an organised way.
Yeah, and I think I've certainly felt that at my school or at my previous school. I know of other people as well where it has felt that sometimes parents, and I take no real light. I've read as much as I can about the for and the against, and personally, I am pro-vaccination, but I know that there is more to be read, and there are many different sides to it. But it has felt that people have pitted parents against schools
Yes.
directly and teachers rather than against the government or against a bigger debate. And certainly I know of parents who've come semi-aggressively at the school because they feel the school is doing something wrong, when in fact the school for the most part is following guidance that has come from somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. It's been, kind of stirred up and becoming an us versus them, which is the last thing that anybody wants, the last thing that any teacher wants, because we all know that the better relationships you have with your pupils, with your families, the better it is for everybody. So, for the fact that it's become such a divisive thing, yeah, and as you say, pitted against each other, that's really concerning. And I think people don't realise that schools aren't just going rogue and closing by themselves. It's national guidelines that we're having to follow.
Yeah, definitely. So that kind of takes us through some different bits. Now, I'm going to read through some of your sort of advice from your article in the test, and we'll talk about some of the different things that you suggest there, things that people can do to kind of proactively, positively, I guess, deal with some of these things. So the number one that you talk about is using your restorative skills when you come across, I guess, negativity in this way. What would that be like?
So I think again that would come down to if you're speaking to someone who is genuine and not just wanting to scream and abuse somebody on social media, if you explain to them, look, actually I've been working flat out, I've been working harder than ever, I'm really stressed and it actually upsets me when you say that about me, reasonable people would hopefully listen to that. And if you spend some time explaining to them, I don't think you realise what we actually do. We've got children in front of us between 9 and 3, but before that, we've got all our planning, our preparation, we've got our marking, we've got a lot of accountability. We need to have everything evidenced. I think some people might be prepared to listen to that if it's just something that they didn't know.
Yeah,
But
I think that.
if it's a reasonable person that you're talking to.
No, I think definitely so. And when I've had conversations with people, it's almost like they forget that a teacher is a person as well. So, I've had conversations with people who, we've followed the guidance and their child has needed to go home from school or for whatever reason. And they'll be angry, they'll be upset. And some of that is rightful. It's a tough situation, particularly if you're having to take time off work. But what they forget is that, there are people who have loved ones at home who are unwell. There are other children who have people at home who might be shielding. And so there is that balance. And it's almost like people in that situation stop seeing the teacher as a person and start seeing them as some kind of machine in the cog in the system. So I think certainly, yeah, going through that for me is a great tip about like explaining quite how tough it is with as a person, the emotions of it. Okay, our next one, you say reduce your exposure.
Yeah, I think if there's, if you're in online groups or real life groups, social situations where people are giving you pelters for it, maybe if it's harming you, maybe you should just step away from that. I'm quite into Buddhist philosophy, and even then it's taught that there is a limit. If someone is that toxic to you, you can disengage with them. It doesn't mean that you mean them any harm, or any bad will, but if someone's hurting you, it's okay to step away, because the compassion has always got to extend to yourself as well as other people.
Yeah, and I think that's really hard for sometimes as teachers, and we see this when we talk about behaviour, whether it's behaviour in class of pupils or whether dealing with parents. And actually, I see it quite a lot in dealing with parents. There was someone who was tweeting this week about whether it was okay to walk away from a parent who was shouting at them. And sometimes we kind of, in our caring profession, take on this that we have to absorb everything. We have to keep taking it. And sometimes you're right. I think we can say enough is enough and just walk away. And that is easier online, I guess, as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think teachers need to be strong in knowing that it's not okay to abuse anybody, and that includes us. And if we're on the receiving end of abuse, you're quite entitled to walk away from that. If you go into a doctor's surgery, there'll be signs up saying abusive staff won't be tolerated. So no human really should have to. I mean, obviously we understand there could be good reason why people are upset, and we can empathise with that and use our skills. But if it's just full on abuse, we're not there to take that. Management aren't there to take that either.
No, yep, certainly. And I think, people should in that, and hopefully their management will stand up for them in that and will, draw that line, same as you would with any behaviour. There is a limit to it. Okay, on to our next one. We talk about trolls.
Yeah, there's been a lot of them recently, hasn't there?
So trolls, generally, we're talking about online, people kind of deliberately provoking.
And I mean, there's places where that there's going to be trolls. There's certain media outlets, that you really shouldn't be looking at the comments because you're just going to upset yourself. But the ones that are starting to deliberately target trade unions like the EIS, the National Union for Education, that's different because that is places where teachers should be able to speak to each other, to raise concerns, or even just offload a little bit. Those places shouldn't be getting invaded at all. So I think that's when we need to act as a collective. And if the union isn't able to give us a private group, then we just have to block these people so that they can't, screech at us and distract people from what they're there to be talking about, the valid concerns that they have.
Yeah, I think so. You're right. And I sometimes see stuff, when I see people putting things out there and I'm kind of like, yeah, no, that's someone trying to bait me. That's someone, I'm not going to respond to that. And that's someone trying to stir something up. And I think, you're right about what you say there about places that are supposed to be safe places. Sometimes we take, I use Twitter a lot, and it is a public and an open forum, and that is wonderful about it. But you're right, there is a time when we need a private collective space as well. As teachers.
What I saw yesterday was the National Education Union. I actually saw that there was an onslaught, and I saw the group where it came from. They'd actually directed members to go to the union page because they'd shared an article about a teacher who'd collated a really good resource on vaccine misinformation. The story was about how the Stephen Hawkins Foundation had taken the resource and that they were going to provide it for free as well. So it was a targeted onslaught. I actually commented, like, teachers, just block these people. You don't need to engage with them. You don't need to persuade them. You won't be able to persuade them anyway. When someone has been radicalised that much, you can't reason with them. You're just going to exhaust yourself.
And I think that's true of a lot of things. When we talked about the tattooed head, that was another thing where a lot of people collectively kind of jumped on, and that collective action of kind of going after someone it can be really quite nasty, I think.
Yeah, it's horrible. I remember seeing that. I remember Pierce Morgan started that, and I also know another teacher who he said a go at in real life. This is a teacher that doesn't have as big a profile, and he was dogpiled, and he got racist abuse, Islamophobic abuse. But what I thought was good about the teacher with the tattoos, the amount of teachers that were then tweeting pictures of their tattoos in solidarity with them, and the teaching community can be really supportive, which is a good thing as well, that people will stick together.
And I really like that as an idea that, a lot of the stuff when we talk about dealing with negativity, we talk about dealing with it with negativity. And actually, you're right, in that situation, a lot of positivity came out in support of it, which was really nice to see. Okay, let's have a look. Don't read the comments is your next one.
Yeah, I think there's certain media outlets, and we all know the ones. If there's some kind of story about education, the headline, the story, it's all going to be quite inflammatory to start with, but that the comments are going to be an absolute cesspit. And as much as curiosity sometimes takes you there, sometimes you're better just not looking at it.
Yeah.
As much as it can be tempting, just don't look at it.
Yeah, certainly. There are things where I've kind of, clicked on further through, clicked on a thread or clicked on and started looking at what people are saying. And I've kind of gone, yeah, no, this is not doing me any good. reading it, and I think some of that is protecting yourself from that, isn't it, from seeing it. But yeah, certainly I tend not to, on some newspaper outlets, shall I say, go to the comment section.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a bit like a car crash sometimes. Like, I know I shouldn't be looking at this, but sometimes you can't help it. But it's much better to try and just not look in the first place and not get yourself drawn in and end up fighting with randoms, with the fake profiles that are going to give you abuse and wind you up.
Okay, and on to our last one, and this for me is a really positive kind of solution to it. Is find a safe space to vent.
Yeah, I think that's been really important this year more than ever with COVID. So myself, my husband, and a friend of mine, we actually started our own Facebook group. But there were some bigger groups, but some people were sort of falling out because some things that were getting posted about to do, whether it was a lockdown or what politicians were saying, it was verging on political. And I think there's a place for that, but some people don't like that. So we thought it made sense to have a separate group where you could have that more political discussion, because I think people really needed it. I can understand why some people don't want that in their groups, and that's fair enough, but we felt that there was very much a need for there to be another group where people could have political discussion and talk to other teachers about what was going on, about how they felt about it, without anybody being able to gaslight them or tell them that people have got it harder, or would you rather be in furlough. We don't need to hear any of that. It's good to have a community where you can talk really openly with people who understand exactly what it's like.
Yeah, I think, and that's the bit that I love. I curate my my Twitter as a positive thing, and before I tweet anything, I try and think: is that putting something good into the world? Am I being positive with it? Because that's the space I use that for. And also, I've been a leader, so I don't want to be sort of showing or saying things that, as a leader, I shouldn't be saying publicly. And so, but certainly, I have groups and venues where I am not so polite and I'm not so kind, and I do vent, for want of a better word. And I think doing that in a safe way is really good, and in a way that I guess doesn't draw attention, that people will start venting back as well.
Yeah, and I think if you'll end up probably collecting quite a lot of like-minded people, because my friend and I had the idea for a group when she'd posted something about subconscious racist bias, and some people got really touchy and offended about it and started complaining about it. And we thought, but a lot of teachers did agree with her. It was on the whole very positive. And we thought there are a lot of teachers who do want to see good change in education, and they do want to challenge systemic racism and play their part and think about how can we be more supportive of marginalised groups of the LGBTQ community. So we found that quite a lot of like-minded people have joined in with us, and it's been, I'm not saying that there's never a disagreement, but there's very little. And it's good to have that group of, it's not that you want it to be an echo chamber, but it's good that you can have these discussions and not have anybody trying to shut you down.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that is a lovely way to kind of navigate some of the negativity that's out there, and a safe space as well. Because I think sometimes the public platforms, you're right with the comments about the pylons and people making comments, because we are all still learning, and there have been a lot of things that have come out, where people are discussing different ideas, where people may want to ask questions or may want to kind of share their thoughts in a more kind of not nuanced way, but a kind of trying to find some understanding of what it means. And unfortunately, if you do say the wrong thing sometimes online, you can open yourself up to kind of either misinterpretation or people deliberately sort of deciding that they want to disagree with you, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And if it's on a public forum, the first thing you're going to get is, and I've seen this from the anti-vaxxers at Target Union pages, they'll start saying that you shouldn't be working with children and you're a Nazi, and it's very inflammatory. And you know that they can't do you any real harm because it's complete, it's just crazy what they're talking, but it's still quite upsetting to be on the receiving end of that. Whereas when you're among other teachers, other people in education, you're not going to, people might disagree with you, which is fine, but you're not going to be threatened and abused and go away worrying about it.
Yeah, certainly. Now, listen, Gemma, it's been amazing talking to you. And I guess this is a topic that could go on for forever and ever, talking about the ways to deal with it. But what I loved about the article particularly was some of the positivity there. So it's been lovely for you to come on and talk to us. Now, is there anything you wanted to say just to finish us off?
Actually, what I've been sharing quite a lot, apparently Finland, so as we probably all know with the PISA ratings, they do very well in education, consistently very high rankings. I read an article recently that they are also the European nation most resistant to conspiracy theories, fake news, and that has been directly attributed to their education system because critical thinking and media literacy, it's all embedded in the curriculum. So I think this is a really interesting thing, and I had a really interesting conversation actually with a nurse about it recently because they've been on the receiving end of it. There was someone in London that was going on about the Nuremberg trials and giving me doctors and nurses' names and saying awful things. So I think that's quite an interesting thing for people to be thinking about, the education, how the education system can counteract fake news, radicalisation, the role that we can play in that long term.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that is, if we can build a society where this is less of a thing, then people are more aware or not so easily fooled by these easy narratives, particularly of things like lazy teachers. Surely it doesn't take much to look past that and go, hang on, they can't be, hang on. For people to be able to think past that. Now, Gemma, thank you so much. What I'm going to do is I will mute you, and then I will unceremoniously, I have to eject you from the studio. That's what it's called. That is not any sense on our comments for today, because it's been wonderful to talk to you. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to say goodbye to Gemma. Bye, Gemma.
Thank you. Good to talk to you. Bye.
You too. So pop you off there. We've got Amy joining us. So I've just welcomed Amy Loxley, who is from the ICANN Children's Communication Charity. Now, Amy should be joining us just now. Amy, I have clicked on it, so you should be able to pop on through. Let's see. I think possibly you've disappeared there. Connected with Amy. I can't see you just now, Amy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop us over to the news. Hopefully during the news, Amy, if you try and connect again, and we'll be able to continue with our conversation, the next part of our conversation, where we're talking about speech and language needs. So off to the news we go, and we'll see you on the other side.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This is your latest Teachers Talk Radio News with Gail Glenn. The supermarket Aldi, in partnership with giving platform Neighbourly, has committed to support charities across the UK to donate surplus food, with more than 700,000 meals going to causes that support children. Mary Dunn, Managing Director of Corporate Responsibility at Aldi UK, said, "We are proud to be supporting so many incredible causes up and down the country, helping to donate meals to those in need this summer. The school holidays can be a hard time for families, particularly when many are experiencing heightened financial hardship due to the pandemic. And this is why we are committed to do what we can to donate more meals than ever before." Steve Butterworth from Neighbourly added, "The summer holidays are always one of the busiest times for the nation's charities and food banks, but this year we've been expecting things to be even busier. Aldi's donations have never been more of a vital support to these organisations." Unions who represent local authority workers in England, Wales and Northern Ireland have said that staff working for councils and in schools are worth more than the 1.75% pay offer put forward by employers. The unions have stated that the offer falls well short of the 10% claim they submitted this year. Unison Deputy Head of Local Government, Mike Short, said, "A 0.25% increase on the initial 1.5% is insignificant. Council staff have kept communities clean and safe, protected the most vulnerable, and worked in schools throughout successive lockdowns to allow others to work. Their courage and sacrifices need to be rewarded, yet the employers are failing to recognise their efforts. There will be a huge impact on morale. Employers say they'd like to give council staff more, but they have refused to work with us to get the money. These workers, mostly women, are amongst the lowest paid in the country and have seen their pay drop substantially in recent years. This 1.75% offer is nowhere near what is needed. Reps from across England, Wales and Northern Ireland will now decide their next move. This has been your daily education news briefing.
And Croeso i Abertawe, Bore Pawb, welcome to Swansea, welcome everyone. And Amy, you should be able to talk now. Let me just unmute you there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi Nathan, how are you?
I am good, thanks. Welcome and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. I thought we lost you there, so I thought we'd just jump to the news, just so we made sure we got you into the studio, ready to talk. So I'll just say to all our listeners, if you missed the start of the show, you can always listen back at ttradio.org, where you can find information about all of our hosts, all of our previous shows you can listen back to. And of course, you can find out information about becoming a host if you're interested, or becoming one of our advertisers, all there on ttradio.org. You can also follow us on Twitter, and actually we are on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, the Podbean app, and of course, as I say, our website, ttradio.org. If you want to text in as the conversation goes, or of course you can call in as well if you have a question for Amy or myself as we talk through. And we are going to be talking about speech and language needs. Amy, can you tell us a little bit about yourself just to get us started?
Sure. So I qualified as a speech and language therapist in 2007 in Western Australia, and I worked for about 5 years there in community clinics and in a private practice as well. Then I moved to the UK in 2012 and worked for about 6 years as a speech and language therapist in some schools and early years clinics across different London boroughs. And then in 2018, I started my current role. So I work as a speech and language advisor for ICANN, who are a children's speech, language and communication charity. Okay.
So obviously a lot of wealth for me to kind of plug into there. And I do, I unfortunately take liberties with my show on Teachers Talk Radio. And I kind of use it a little bit to kind of, you'll hear me dropping in things where I talk about my own practice and try and just pull out a little thing that I might be able to use for helpful for me in class, hopefully helpful for our listeners as well. If we start off though by kind of talking about what are, or what do we mean when we say speech, language communication needs? What sort of things does that encompass?
Yeah, so I guess when we say speech language communication needs, or SLCN, it's kind of an umbrella term that we might use to refer to a range of difficulties that children could have with speaking and understanding language. And so often people might assume that it refers to a stammer or a stutter or to difficulty pronouncing words, but it's actually much more than that. And at ICANN, we kind of work to support 3 general groups of children. So there's children who might have delayed language development, so they might be a bit behind with their speaking and understanding, but they may be able to catch up with the right support in place. Then there's children who have what's known as developmental language disorder. So that's when they've got lifelong difficulties with language, but it's not associated with another known condition. And then there might be children who've got SEND and their language difficulties might be more complex.
Okay, so it's quite a broad kind of thing that we're looking to. What would be some of the things that we see, if that makes sense, as a practitioner? What am I looking out for when we talk about those things? So we've said not just stammer or stutter, a delay in their ability to talk. So talking like a much younger child, would that be?
Yeah, sometimes that's how it looks, that they might talk just like a much younger child, or it might be that their speech, perhaps their words sound a bit muddled up, might be a bit hard to make sense of what they're saying. Maybe they're not using correct grammar, or they make kind of grammatical errors a lot more than other children their age. But sometimes, it's very difficult to pick out speech and language difficulties sometimes, because it's often referred to as an invisible disability. So it might be that you notice perhaps a child is sort of following what their peers are doing in the classroom when they're given an instruction, rather than being able to sort of listen and understand and follow it themselves. or perhaps they seem like they're not listening or they're not paying attention a lot of the time, but that can be because of an underlying language difficulty.
Okay, so what could be, I guess, are there causes of SLCN, or is there, is it too broad a thing for us to sort of, where do these delays come from?
It's really tricky. We don't always know the cause. And so with something like developmental language disorder or DLD, which I mentioned before, there's no known cause. We think that it's due to a combination of different factors, including some genetic factors, but we don't really know any more than that at the moment. Sometimes a child's SLCM might be associated with another condition. So a child might have autism or Down syndrome or something like that, and then they might have a language disorder associated with that. But yeah, it's tricky because we often don't know the cause.
Okay, but how common are they then?
It's much more common than a lot of people think. So DLD, or developmental language disorder, affects 7.6% of children. So that's roughly 2 children in every primary class of 30 in the UK. If we're talking about SLCN as the broader category, we might say we think that's around 10% of all children who are affected by that. So it's really common.
So yeah, as you say, so I could be, it could be 3 children in my primary school classroom that I could be thinking that there is some kind of speech language or communication need that I maybe need to be providing for and maybe need to be adapting for.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the difficult thing is that sometimes it might present as something else, or it might not always look like a language difficulty. So it will manifest in different ways in different children. There might be one child who's very quiet and withdrawn because of their language difficulty. And so they fly under the radar that way. But then another child who's got SLCN is perhaps they've got some behaviour needs, or they're kind of acting out to cover up that they're not always understanding, or they're not able to express themselves so well.
Okay, so I'm getting this kind of this complex picture. As a sort of as a speech language therapist or specialist, what kind of things do people sort of then refer for? Then do they? How do teachers go about spotting this? How does it get noticed?
I guess often it would be that a teacher might notice some of those things that are a bit more obvious. So they might notice a behaviour issue first, or it could be that you might notice a difficulty with learning, with reading, or with literacy, because language underlies all of those skills. Or perhaps, as I said before, perhaps you notice that a child's a bit more vacant, or they seem to be in their own world. They're sort of daydreaming a bit. So often it might not look like a language difficulty initially, but we'd say if you're sort of noticing some of these concerns and you're wondering what it is, then it's often worth having a closer look at their language skills and seeing if there might be an issue there. And in terms of referring to speech and language therapy, generally services will sort of want your observations in all of those areas. So they'll want to know how they present in the classroom. They might want to know if you've had a look at their understanding, their ability to follow instructions, how they answer questions, and then how they kind of express themselves, and are they able to sort of tell a story and things like that.
Okay, and so we're talking about, if we take that 10% figure again, I'm guessing at what age do people generally sort of notice or start referring children through this sort of route, or seeing that there might be a problem? Is it typically early primary? Do children get noticed later on in school, or is it the younger children that it's noticed in?
It really varies. Sometimes children are identified before they get to school in the early years, because perhaps they're late to start talking, or they're not talking as much as their peers. So parents might identify a difficulty at that age. But then for other children, it might not be identified then, and it's once they actually get to school and they're under demands in terms of academic work, and they're starting to learn to read and to write and things like that, that then their difficulties become more apparent. But then there's other children again who are able to sort of fly under the radar the whole time at primary school, perhaps because they develop coping strategies. But then once they get to secondary school, you know, we know that the academic demands are much greater. They're exposed to a lot more language. They're expected to be much more independent and much more organised. And even socially, you know, they need the language to be able to interact with their peers and to sort of change the style of talking compared to if they're speaking to a teacher or to a peer. So sometimes it's actually at that age, at secondary school, that their difficulties become really apparent.
Okay, again, you know, a really interesting part of it for me, I guess, where I'm thinking that, you know, as I say, because, you know, I keep looking back and I've written it down, I've written a big 3 on a post-it note next to me about the, you know, these 3 children. And I currently work at a school that, you know, took communication really seriously, and we wanted to be part of the communication commitment that I knew the Communication Trust, as it was doing. And we had all of our teaching assistants trained as, I believe they called it ELKLAND training, but it was a speech and language kind of training course that they did to quite a high level that we invested in because we were. But again, I look at this number and if that's the amount, I think we've missed some. And so I just imagine that as it goes on. So in an older child, then it could present as poor social skills. It could present as poor interaction with adults, not knowing how to talk to a teacher or not understanding their academic work.
Yeah, definitely. I guess in secondary school, you see the academic impact. It's very pronounced by that age because they need access to a much greater range of vocabulary for their different subject lessons. And what I said about them needing to be much more organised and much more independent in their learning and things like that. Often children with language difficulties will really struggle by that stage. So, you know, sometimes you might notice those things in terms of the academic impact. Sometimes, like you said, yeah, it'd be having the social skills to fit in with their peers. They might find it really hard to sort of keep up with conversations with their peers because they need extra time to process what's being said. Or maybe they find it really hard to keep up with slang and learning the slang of the language of teens and things like that. And sometimes, you know, it might be things like, because as children get into adolescence, their understanding really develops. So they're understanding inferential language, they're able to understand idioms and sarcasm, and much more subtle or witty humour. So for a student who's got language difficulties, those things are much more difficult. So there might be difficulties in those areas that you notice. We actually did a webinar for secondary teachers on developmental language disorder a few months ago, and we asked the teachers what these students look like in their classrooms, and they came up with words like confused, disorganized, bored, disruptive, anxious, lonely. So, I mean, it's a really mixed picture, and they can all present really differently, but you get the message that it's kind of you know, that the impact by secondary you can really see in terms of their behaviour and things like that.
Yes, definitely. I'm just going to say we had a caller there, CX63 Will, who tried to call in. You appeared for a second, and before I could click on to accept you in, you disappeared again. But if you do have a question for us, remember you can text in, you can call in. So feel free, CX63 Will, if you want to try and call in again, and you have a question for us, by all means click that button, and I will try and get to you before it disappears, so that you can join the conversation, or of course any other of our listeners if you want to join the conversation. Now, Amy, one of the things I guess to help sort of put this in perspective for some of us. Now, for me, I have very young children. I've got a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old. I'm used to teaching primary, so I've got a little bit of a kind of understanding of roughly where children should be. But what are the kind of developmental sort of stages broadly that we would expect language development or speech and language development to move in as a child grows then?
Yeah, so I guess with very young children, so even before school age, we're kind of looking at their vocabulary, how they're putting words together into simple sentences. We'd still expect them to make mistakes. So they might say things like run for ran, or they might make some mistakes with their sounds or the pronunciation of words. In terms of their understanding, they're probably following some instructions, maybe with sort of 3 key words or something like that. And you generally be thinking they might understand and use some words for different concepts like colour or size or position concepts and things like that. But then when children are sort of primary aged, I guess you're looking a lot more for kind of their ability to sustain their attention. So they're much more independent at sustaining their attention on adult-led activities. They're sort of able to follow class instructions, maybe with 2 or 3 separate parts to them. And then you're sort of looking at them being able to use their language skills for literacy. So reading and writing and spelling, all of them are built in a foundation of oral language skills. They've been using more complex sentences, starting to share more complex ideas, and they should be able to tell you a story in order. So they should be able to tell you what they've done on the weekend, or about a holiday they went on, or about a game that they're really into, or something like that. And you should be able to make sense of it.
Okay, and you talked a little bit there about sort of earlier on about sarcasm and wit and humour, and I have heard say before, and this was very ad hoc that people have said to me, is that primary school children don't get sarcasm, or primary school children don't get wit in that way. Is that something that's developmentally there? Or, is that someone taking something a bit ad lib with me, or?
Yeah, I mean, language does develop kind of all the way through school, through primary and secondary school. And obviously children in primary school will get some types of humour. They do understand humour. But as children get into secondary school, their understanding it becomes much more sophisticated. So then they are able to understand sarcasm and, idioms and things like that. They're able to understand much more subtle humour compared to a primary age child.
Certainly. All right, Amy, we are going to have to pop to an ad break. I'm going to keep you on the line. I will mute your microphone so that as we go through the ads, and I'll unmute you on the other side. Welcome to all the people who are joining the studio. I can see you all there. Don't forget, you can text in if you're listening live, and we'll answer any questions. You can also call in if you want to. Obviously, it is Teachers Talk Radio, so we want to hear those conversations. I'm going to pop us to our first ad break, and we will see you guys on the other side.
Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers. At Creative Resources, we've been rethinking what a classroom can be. We've created a huge range of more than 2,500 original and exciting resources that span across more than 15 different subject areas. Whether you're looking for primary or secondary level resources, careers options, PSHE, arts, or humanities, Creative Resources have the resources for you. We offer full curriculum packages and unique, challenging escape rooms themed on topics such as Shakespeare, Tudors, and fractions. We have quizzes, task cards, Tarsier puzzles, and lots more. Better still, more than 100 resources can be accessed for free. Just visit our website, www.cre8tiveresources.com. You can get 10% off any order you make on our website by using the discount code TT Radio. Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers. Every teacher loves stationery, right? Imagine getting a selection of fun, beautiful, and unique stationery items designed and selected especially for teachers, delivered through your door every month. You need to check out teacherslovestationery.club.
I'm always so excited when the box arrives. It's such a treat.
My Teachers Love Stationery Club box is just a little treat to myself every month.
It's always full of delightful and surprising items, including some really good quality stationery brands like Faber-Castell and Stabilo.
And because you never know what you're going to get, it makes it even more fun and special when you get it.
It feels really great to be supporting a family business that's run by real teachers. I can't help feeling like they just know what I'm going to enjoy using stationery-wise better than I do myself.
Visit teacherslovestationery.club and enter the code TT Radio when you buy your first stationery box to save £2 today. teacherslovestationery.club. Introducing the Leadership Masterclass series by Diana Osagi. Learn how to ditch your fears and develop your leadership confidence. How to deal with difficult colleagues. How to thrive when you lead in a challenging environment. and how to get colleagues to buy into your vision. Join Diana for her online leadership masterclasses starting on the 10th of July and running all the way through the summer. These sessions are the perfect way to prepare and refresh for the next academic year and beyond. Book your place at courageousleadership.co.uk/events now. The first 50 leaders to sign up get an additional free mini coaching session with Diana herself. Don't miss this. Courageous Leadership Masterclasses at courageousleadership.co.uk/events.
Croeso i Abertawe, welcome to Swansea. Bore da pawb. Hello everyone. Amy, I have unmuted you, and we are talking with Amy Loxley on behalf of the ICANN Children's Communication Charity. We're talking about speech and language needs. So welcome back, Amy.
Hello, thanks, Nathan.
Hi. As I say, if you're listening in live, you can text a message into us, or of course, you can call in if you have a question here at Teachers Talk Radio. Amy, before we went to the ad break there, you're just talking us through some of the sort of, I guess, the types of speech, language and communication needs that there are, a kind of brief run through of the development that we can generally expect children to go through. And I will say that on the ICANN website, there is a kind of, let me just check the naming of it, the progress checker, which I did admittedly do for my own children, just to check. But that's because I'm a teacher parent and I'm constantly judging them against other people, I guess. And so that is, again, a very useful feature and is well worth checking out the ICANN.org website. Now, I wanted to ask you, as we came back after the ad break there, are there any common misconceptions about speech, language and communication needs?
Yeah, I guess one of the common misconceptions is that children will grow out of it. But we know with lots of types of SLCN, and particularly something like DLD, it's lifelong. So the way that it might manifest in a child might change as they get older, but it's likely that they will have some difficulties with speaking and with understanding language kind of throughout school and even into adulthood. There's also kind of that misconception about language development being finished by the time you get to school age. But as I was saying before, we know that actually language development goes on all the way through school. And even at secondary age, children are still developing aspects of their language skills. And I guess maybe one of the other things is just how language difficulties can be misinterpreted as something else. So it might present as a learning difficulty, or it might look like dyslexia or a behaviour issue. But often if we sort of dig a bit deeper, it may be that there's a language problem underlying those difficulties.
Yeah, I guess that must be really, really difficult when we talk about kind of the understanding instructional language, because I guess some people sometimes would sort of say, oh, no, they can talk fine, they don't have a language problem or they don't have a speech problem. But really, as you were sort of saying before, it's much broader than that. What we're talking about, it's not children who have just children who have a stutter, or it's not children who struggle to talk. It's actually a much broader kind of definition of what a need is.
Yeah, and I guess that's why it's sometimes referred to as an invisible disability, because on the surface level, they may look like just any other child. They may still be talking and they might still have friends and be generally getting by in the classroom. But it could be something a bit more subtle, like perhaps their words get a bit muddled when they're talking, or when they're sort of telling you a longer story, it's hard for them to put the events in the right order. So it's difficult for you to follow what they're saying. Or those difficulties with understanding language that we were talking about. So their understanding of vocabulary might not be as well developed as their peers. So they find it harder to follow a lesson, or it's harder for them to sort of remember instructions in their mind and then to follow them.
Yeah, and I guess one of the other things that I wanted to ask you, sort of leading on from that, is I know the charity, has done some work on sort of changing the conversation, some work on, I guess, what we would in education term as disadvantaged groups. But is there a certain demographic that we notice within speech, language and communication needs, or is it affecting everyone equally? Do demographic changes mask what could be some needs that are there?
Well, the 10% figure that I mentioned earlier, that is kind of across all groups. So that's not specific to a particular demographic. But we do know there is research that says that children will be twice as likely to have SLCN in areas of social disadvantage. And even some of the recent research about the impact of COVID also illustrates that point, that children in areas of social disadvantage might be more at risk. So yeah, I guess we don't fully understand the reasons behind that yet, but it could be that because, you know, if there's a family living in poverty, they've got lots of pressures, and they might have worries about income and other life stresses and things like that. And so having time to talk lots to their children and things, it's a bit lower on the priority list perhaps. But yeah, it's a challenge.
Okay, but I guess one of the things that we can do to mitigate any sort of potential speech and language and communication needs that are developing is that good sort of communication at home or just in general in the classroom. It's something that I guess we talk a lot often in schools about raising that the high quality teaching for all improves it for everyone. And it has a bigger impact. Would that be something that's true of, I guess, conversation in the home, conversation around school?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, you mentioned the change in the conversation project. So that was an early years project that we did, which was really focused on helping families with using more talk in the home and just using as much sort of talk as they can and making the most of talking opportunities throughout the day. And also just explaining to them why it's important, giving them information about why talking is important. And then it's similar in the classroom. Yeah, like you said, if we can have a foundational level of universal provision that supports the speech and language skills of all students, that's going to be good for everybody. It'll be good for those children who don't have any additional needs, but then it will also really support the ones who need that extra help.
Certainly. And I guess what a question that I think I wanted to ask, I guess, of you, now that I know that you're Australian and that I teach in Wales, and does accent, does language have an impact on these things? Do we see it internationally that there are speech and language there are speech and language needs, or is it specific to English?
Well, when we say a child's got a speech language communication need, it's a difficulty learning any language. So it wouldn't be specific to English. And if a child's learning English as an additional language, if they have a different first language, then for them to be classed as having SLCM, we'd need to see that they've actually got difficulties in their home language as well. So the other thing to be aware of is that research tells us that having English as an additional language definitely doesn't cause or contribute to language difficulties. So, and there's lots of proven benefits of learning more than one language. So our advice to parents is always that they continue speaking their first language or their strongest language to their child, because that having a strong foundation of skills in any language will support them with learning English as well.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. It's just something that, as I say, comes up with me. I know my boys are in Wales. You learn English and Welsh and use a lot of it in the classroom at the same time. So you kind of learn there's a lot of bilingualness about being a teacher in Wales. So it's just something that since I had you there, I was like, oh, actually, do you know what? Maybe I'll just check in. And they do say, actually, a lot of the research around it does say that actually the Welsh language does support their language development. But I just went off on a tangent there, as I say, these little things. So back on track and the kind of things that I had planned. So we've talked a bit about the ICANN charity. Can you tell us kind of a little bit about the other work that it does and support that it gives to schools and parents?
Yeah, so we have a range of free resources and information for schools and parents. So you mentioned our progress checker online, which is a really useful resource. So that's on our Talking Point website. On the same website, we've got an ages and stages section. So that sort of gives an indication of what children should be doing at different ages with their speaking and understanding. And it gives some red flags as well to look out for. We've got our inquiry service as well. So that's a free helpline that parents and professionals can phone and book an appointment with a speech and language therapist to have a phone call with them and just get some advice about a child that they're concerned about. So those appointments can be booked online. And for schools, we've got some free resources and then some paid for interventions as well. So as well as the Talking Point website and the inquiry service I mentioned, we've also got a web page that's got loads of resources on developmental language disorder. So there's some introductory and intermediate webcasts that teachers can watch. We've got a downloadable DLD guide, and we've got a PowerPoint template that SENCOs or senior leaders can use to share information in staff training with their schools about DLD. And in terms of the paid for interventions I mentioned, we've got our Talk Boost interventions. So they're targeted intervention programs for children who've got delayed language, and it helps them to narrow the gap between them and their peers. And in the secondary age group, we've got an intervention called Talk for Work, and that's all about getting students ready for the workplace and teaching them communication skills that they need for the workplace.
Oh, do you know what? That is something that I will jump on just quickly, because I've just, as I say, I transitioned from being a deputy head at a primary school. I'm actually working in what we call alternative provision. So it's children who at secondary level maybe struggle to learn in a mainstream environment, would be the kind of often for behavioural reasons. But one of the things we look at is making sure that they have the capacity to not be not in education or training, not a NEET. And so there is something, I guess, there that you say can be done to support them, to help them work in I say the real world, but to help them be able to communicate as a teen if they were struggling with that.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we do with students who are older and sort of in the secondary age group and getting ready to transition into the workplace is really about teaching them functional skills for the real world. So we will be working with them on things like how they can communicate in the workplace, how they might interpret different social situations that might happen, even working through what to do in a particular situation, like particular problems that might arise. And then also it's the other thing is about getting them ready for the workplace by understanding their own needs and understanding what's difficult for them and what extra support they might need in the workplace, and then being able to sort of express that to other people.
Yeah. And so, we've talked about these kind of, I guess, a couple of different elements now. There's, I guess, supporting people to find coping mechanisms with a need that will continue. As we've talked about with some of the delays and some of the needs. But we've also talked a bit about what sounds like, some of the programs that are able to catch children up, or sort of, I guess, to overcome, so that would you say that they would no longer have a speech and language need, that they have addressed the need? Is that something that's possible?
For some children, yes. So for children who are in that group that I mentioned earlier, so that they're known as having delayed language. So that's when they're a bit behind their peers in terms of their speaking and understanding. But it's thought with the right support in place, often they can catch up. So sometimes putting a targeted intervention in place to help them with their language development will be all that's needed and will help them to catch up. But that's kind of quite a good thing to do, actually. If you notice a child who's having some difficulty in the classroom and you think that they might have some language needs, if you put a targeted intervention in place and you see what progress they make, that will help you to work out whether they've got more long-term difficulties or not, and whether you might need specialist support. So for those children who don't make the progress that you're expecting with the targeted intervention, they're the ones that you might then want to refer on to speech and language therapy.
That's a brilliant sort of tip, I guess, for teachers who may be listening, to be able to kind of proactively take this on, which leads us also then, we've talked a little bit about targeted intervention there, which takes on to kind of, I guess, as a school, the school I've just left, and certainly the school I'm going to, inclusive practice is something that we were very passionate about. So we wanted to become, a very communication aware, very communication family, a very communication friendly school. So I guess my question would be then, what kind of things can a school do at a macro level, at a whole school level, rather than a small intervention level for a specific child, that helps address communication needs, or helps make it, I guess, speech, language and communication friendly?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, because that's one of the challenges that you really have as a teacher, right? That you've got children with all different ability levels in the classroom, and you need to meet the needs of all of them. So if you can do some simple things and make some small changes in the school environment, then that can support children who don't have any additional needs, and those ones who've got SLCN as well. So I guess if we're thinking about being communication friendly, maybe we'd think of making the environment really visual. So using pictures and diagrams and other visual supports in teaching, having sort of visually labelled resources, and even maybe using a visual timetable or a written list of activities, because that just ensures that even those children who've got language difficulties have a visual cue, and they've got something to help them understand, even if they're not able to follow everything that's been said.
Now, Amy, we've got someone, Gleason Educo, possibly saying there, or sorry if I've got your name wrong. They're saying UDL in action, woven into curriculum design and practices. Now, Gleason, I'm not familiar with UDL as an acronym. Amy, are you familiar with that?
I'm not actually, sorry.
No, but if you're still there, Gleason, if you could type that in, certainly, I guess it sounds like you're talking about inclusion, as I would term it, but I'm not very good with acronyms. As I say, moving between different countries and different education systems means I get a little lost with the shorthand for some of them. But yeah, okay, so Amy, some of the things you described there about us clearly labelling things. One of the things I noticed in my school, for instance, was that we never had the word toilet anywhere, because we used symbols for it. You know, and so we weren't really using the word that much, or children certainly weren't seeing it, or they often would call it the loo, I guess. Is this labelling and clearly doing things? It certainly will support some children. Is it negative for other children, or is it going to support everyone with their language development?
I think if you had the written word as well as a symbol, that could be quite good, because then you're supporting children's literacy skills as well. Having a symbol is definitely not going to be detrimental for other children. But yeah, if you pair it with the written word as well, then they're developing their print awareness and their literacy skills as well.
Okay, and so some of the other things then that I'd be thinking about, and I guess we're still talking maybe primary at the moment before I move on to my, I'm transitional, as I say, from primary to secondary as we speak. So my visual timetable's there, and I think that's something that's often common in a lot of primary school classrooms, but sometimes I guess gets missed if teachers feel that they haven't got a child with a specific need. But that's something that certainly would cover off a lot of needs, I know, certainly. Oh, and Gleason Educo there is saying it's universal design for learning. Yeah, certainly, I think that is what we're talking about. So wonderful to get another acronym under my belt. But yeah, so I guess people prompt cards, things like that is something that we can do more of, so that all children do it. Clearly labelling as well is something that I think a lot of teachers do, but maybe is a thing that gets left off if they're in a rush.
Yeah, it might even be like writing down instructions, as you say them. I mean, I know a lot of teachers would do that, but sort of making sure that you're always giving a visual cue alongside what you're saying as well.
Okay, yeah, so I find that really interesting. Oh, brilliant, Gleason, thank you. They've popped a little YouTube link in there for me as well, so I will check on that. I'm just going to make a note of it while we are talking. But yeah, so on an earlier show, I had a person who was talking about Makaton, and we had done a lot of work because we couldn't sing in class. This person had created videos of people singing along in Makaton, so the kids could sing along. And so it came across from a strange route into it. But then I found that I was using it a lot more, particularly when wearing a mask. So using gestures as well, this kind of doing two things at once is helpful for speech, language and communication needs.
Yeah, definitely, because it's just adding another visual cue. So if you're using gestures or keyword signing, you're kind of making your speech last longer. One of the quite a powerful video that's online of somebody called Lily Farrington. She talks about her developmental language disorder diagnosis and what it means for her. And she says that when people are talking, it's as if the words are kind of hanging in the air, and then they're falling, and she's trying to catch them, but they're falling so fast that she can't catch them all, and she can't make sense of what people are saying. And so if we can sort of give an extra cue alongside the auditory signal, like a gesture or a keyword sign or a diagram or a written word or something, it just makes it easier for them to hold on to what's being said.
It's really interesting to hear that. And someone sort of another comment in, Gemma Clark is there saying, good point, the environment should be inclusive for all, even if we don't think there are specific needs in the room. And that actually, for me, is something that I feel really passionately about, because, as I say, when we talk about that 10%, chances are that I don't know all the needs that are in the room. As well informed as I can be, there might be needs, and as you've sort of said, I guess, these hidden needs as well, that I might not be able to see. So if I'm doing it, I'm kind of, I don't quite have the words for it. I'm maybe hitting the ground running, or I'm safety netting myself for it. I have a couple more for you. One of the things that comes through is, I guess, a question around consistent vocabulary and using the same vocabulary. And I know you talked about there struggling to understand slang. Is the language we use in that sense then a barrier for speech and language and communication needs? Do we have to be careful about what we're using the words for?
Yeah, I think it is helpful if we can think about how we're using our language. So if we can make sure that we're using vocabulary that we know that all the students understand and is familiar to them, then it means it's accessible for all of them. Similarly, it might be doing things like pausing in between explaining key points so that all the students have got time to process what's being said, or just making sure that instructions are given in the order that you want children to follow them, because it's easier for all children to understand. And even just repeating key points at the end of what you say, so to give them an extra repetition, an extra chance to understand it. So I think, those ways of actually adapting your language and what you're saying are really important as well.
Okay, so that's kind of, I guess, I frame that broadly as what I would consider primary practice, and a lot of people would, with a lot of those things we've talked about there, the labeling, and because of the nature of a primary classroom and knowing your children. And as I say, this is where I kind of get some tips for myself, I guess. I'm moving on to a secondary provision, and all of those things that I would do in a primary school, I feel a bit lost at. Do I have to change my provision for secondary age children? Is it a different set of needs? Do I approach them in a different way?
Yeah, I think the principles are often the same, but maybe the way you approach them is different. So if we're thinking about those things of making the environment visual, it might be that in the secondary classroom, you've got definitions of key vocabulary, like science vocabulary stuck up on the wall of the science classroom that then the teacher refers to often while they're teaching. That could be how a visual support is used there. I think in secondary as well, I mean, this is still the case in primary, but it does become more important in secondary. You're wanting to really create an environment where students are encouraged to monitor whether they're understanding what's been said and to ask for help if they don't understand. So you're kind of teaching them that self-help skill of asking for help and of saying when they don't understand something. And to do that, we have to create an environment where if children put up their hand and they ask for something to be repeated, or they say that they don't know what to do, we almost like reward them for actually asking rather than interpreting it as them sort of not listening or not paying attention. So I think that's something to sort of bear in mind, especially at secondary age.
Yeah, I think, there's something there that I can really grasp onto. I think that you're saying that, I think particularly working in alternative provision, as I will be, that I think some of these children who potentially might be struggling because they have speech, language and communication needs, but certainly if they have put their hand up because they don't understand something, have been snapped at, maybe have lost the confidence, or possibly even in front of their peers, I guess, at a secondary level, that ability to kind of sort of say, actually, I don't get it. I don't understand what you mean by that. And that must be quite challenging at a secondary level.
Yeah, definitely. Because like you said, they're dealing with all the things of trying to fit in with their peers and that being self-aware and embarrassed and things. So I think we do have to be aware of that and really try to create an environment where it's not a big deal if somebody doesn't understand or they ask for help.
Listen, Amy, we are going to have to go to an ad break soon, and so it is time for me to say goodbye to you. It's been a wonderful conversation. I felt I've learned so much, and hopefully some of our listeners have too. I will say, let me just make sure that I get our website address correct. So there is ican.org.uk, where you can find a lot of the things that we've been talking about. Incredibly useful website, and incredibly important charity work that is going on there. Is there anything you wanted to say just before we head off to the news, and then I finish off the show?
Oh no, just thank you for having me. It's been really enjoyable for me as well.
No, as I say, it has been lovely. And if there are any of our listeners who missed the start of the conversation, don't forget you can listen back on ttradio.org to this or any of our shows on Teachers Talk Radio. So, Amy, I'm afraid it is slightly unceremonious, this bit, because the button that I have to click is called eject. So I do have to eject you from the studio, from the call, I'm afraid. But thank you again so much for coming on and explaining some of this stuff to me and our listeners. So thank you.
Thanks for having me, Nathan.
Thank you. Right. And as I say, we are going to head off to one more ad break before I come back and wrap it all up for us. So off to our ads, and I will see you all on the other side.
Every teacher loves stationery, right? Imagine getting a selection of fun, beautiful and unique stationery items designed and selected especially for teachers, delivered through your door every month. You need to check out teacherslovestationery.club.
I'm always so excited when the box arrives. It's such a treat.
My Teachers Love Stationery Club box is just a little treat to myself every month.
It's always full of delightful and surprising items, including some really good quality stationery brands like Faber-Castell and Stabilo.
And because you never know what you're going to get, it makes it even more fun and special when you get it.
It feels really great to be supporting a family business that's run by real teachers. I can't help feeling like they just know what I'm going to enjoy using stationery-wise better than I do myself.
Visit teacherslovestationery.club and enter the code TTRadio when you buy your first stationery box to save £2 today. teacherslovestationery.club.
And Croeso Abertawe, Brydar Pawb, welcome to Swansea. Hello, everyone. If you are joining us now, you are joining right at the end of the show. And what a show we've had. At the start of the show, we talked to Gemma Clark about teacher bashing and what we can do about it in a positive way, the different kinds of teacher bashing that there is, and some of the steps that we can take to protect ourselves and also to address it, I guess, in some way, and put a bit of positivity about the profession back out there into the world. Also, you missed from us Amy Loxley, who was talking to us from the ICANN Children's Communication Charity about speech, language and communication needs. Now, again, an amazing conversation, very worthwhile listening back to if you can, because she gave some really useful tips, explained it in such a clear way for me to understand those progress that the children can move through as they're with us through primary and secondary and even before, and some of the barriers, some of those red flags, and some of the things that we can do as professionals to really address or at least support and help some of those needs. So amazing conversation there. As I say, you can visit our website at ttradio.org to find out more about our hosts, listen back to any of our shows, and of course find out about becoming one of our advertisers, or if you feel you would like to find out about becoming one of our hosts. Another one of our hosts who is on later this evening at 10 o'clock till 11:30 is Christopher Vowles. And he's going to be talking about chess in education. And that's something I'll listen back to. I was a chess club at school myself, so I'll certainly be listening in to find out about that. He'll be talking also about supporting parents with maths, and he'll be talking also about a wisdom-rich curriculum. Obviously, we're here on the Podbean app. We are on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube. We're on LinkedIn. We're on Instagram. Whatever your social media of preference, tune in and talk it out and join the conversation with us. Now, as I say, and we wrap all things up, it is my first live show from Swansea, Abertawe. Welcome to Swansea, Croeso Abertawe. And you may have heard seagulls going past the windows as we go, because I am now by the sea in South Wales, not just for the summer, but to spend the next stage of my teaching career. So I'm very excited about being here. Obviously, my two young boys very excited about that they will play rugby in red now. A little bit heartbroken myself that they won't be playing in white, although I suppose that, you know, I could try and ship them across the border, maybe to Bristol, to try and get them in a team there. But it is a long way to go on a Saturday morning for their rugby club. But yeah, so I've got my two little Welsh rugby boys with me here in South Wales, where we'll be spending the summer, and then I will be teaching my way through alternative provision, which you'll have heard me talking with Amy about some of those tips and how I can transfer some of the skills that I learned for communication needs in primary school into a secondary provision. So as I say, really interesting kind of conversation there and debate about how those things fit together and how that will work. So as I say, if you have joined us, thank you for listening in. You can always listen back. Don't forget to tune in later for Christopher Vowles, as I say, on the Late Late Show, 10 till 11:30, talking about chess in education, supporting parents with maths and wisdom-rich curriculum. Don't forget to visit us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, the Podbean app, and our website, ttradio.org, where you can find out about our hosts, becoming a host, becoming one of our advertisers, or of course my favorite feature, listen back to any of the shows you've missed this week, or save them, play them back to someone else, or save them till you've got a pen and paper, which I do sometimes do. Save it there so that I can make sure I make notes. And thank you to Gleason Educo. I have saved that Twitter, that YouTube link, so I will be checking out on there to make sure that I am up to date with Universal Design for Learning, to make sure, because that sounds like something that is right up my street. So as I say, thank you all, and here comes the fade out music. See you all again next time. Hwyl fawr.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.
Nosta, everyone. Good night.